Day 126 to 1:32 p.m. Hotel Tower Rooftop, Bally's Casino, Atlantic City, New Jersey, United States of America. Mark and May returned to the rooftop with the incapacitated Queen type in tow. This action caused the spider-latched infected to turn berserk, rushing up the building as fast as they could. They all growled and roared in unison, making loud noises unpleasant to anyone's ears. Unfortunately, it would not be easy for them to climb up once more without using the maze-like interior of the building. Almost no one noticed, but most of the windows and walls at the lower part of the hotel tower already turned to rubble. Everyone was interested in and focused on May's fight that they did not notice that Mark aimed for the destruction of the lower parts of the hotel tower. The damage was not severe. However, it was almost impossible for the infected to climb up using the face of the building. That was why, even though they returned on the rooftop, Mark was not worried about being disturbed by the minions of the Queen type. Nevertheless, it did not make the whole situation safe for anyone. From the rooftop of the hotel tower, anyone would be able to see the situation. The infected all over the area, and possibly the whole city, were gathering around the casino. It was not a big city, after all. There was no need to mention the entire situation. Just the last attack Morgan used was enough to shake the whole place after he collapsed a large part of the casino. And now, all sorts of infected could be seen everywhere, whether it be on land, air, or water. That huge cat that May had taken down just now was just one of the fastest infected in the city and one of those that arrived earlier than the others. From the eastern coast, a human-sized octopus emerged, dragging its unstable body to cross the beach towards the casino. From the northern suburbs, a small horde of charred-looking infected was stumbling towards the area. There was a horde of 1.5-meter-tall dogs running from the south. Aside from those, there were more than 5,000 infected that were rushing towards the area. It was more than enough to make the faces of the few people left at the tower pale. It was clear that there were only the 14 of them left from the 150 people that were initially in their group since this morning. Fighting against a few hundred infected was already impossible for them. None of them would ever dare think of facing several thousand. And thus, they could only look at the two people that flew back to the roof. They felt scared that the two brought back the infected woman. Nevertheless, to escape the current situation, these two were only their hope. Furthermore, the man clad in a cloak of black smoke had already saved them once. Still, the group could not fathom how the two could have a relaxed attitude despite the situation. Mark tilted his head as he examined the Queen type. A bit. Mayor, you overdid it. Mark could only shrug. Many bones of the Queen type broke from the battle. It was no wonder why it was so much in pain. As the consciousness of the Queen was still vigorous, it was not dying. However, it was questionable if it would recover. Sorry. May could only meekly apologize. She knew that she lost control because of the things in her mind. Luckily, she did not end up killing the Queen type by accident. Mark patted her head without any hint of anger. It was not like May did not do anything good for the situation. May's sudden arrival might be too sudden. However, it helped Mark in one very crucial thing. It was to keep his cards hidden from the multitudes of eyes that were currently watching. It was more than easy for him to dispatch the infected that was swarming the building in one go. However, it would reveal his abilities in the eyes of dangerous beings, especially from the likes of Professor Alston. They might be cooperating with the US government. Nevertheless, no one would be able to tell the true goals of these extraterrestrial visitors for coming to Earth. With May's appearance, even though she failed to hold herself back, it was better than him showing what he was truly capable of. If they were enemies, even if they managed to gauge May's abilities from her display earlier, they would still hesitate to do any move against him since they knew less about him. All right, we have to move out. This place is going to be a mess soon. Mark said as his eyes panned towards the survivors waiting for him and May. Well then. Mark spoke. I saved all of you here because you passed my criterion. We will leave this place as soon as possible. But all of you have to listen to my instructions. Hearing those words, although they were all confused as to what criterion Mark was talking about, they could only nod. After all, Mark and May were their only ticket out of this place. You see, we can't take all of you out of this place in one go, so others have to wait here. Before Mark could continue, Arnold spoke. Then, please, take the children and the women first. Us men can wait. Hearing that, Mark smiled. This guy was truly fitting as their leader. Unfortunately, only a few people from his group were fit to be under him. That's what I'm planning in the first place. Mark looked at May, and they nodded at each other. He was about to lift the queen type, however, May beat him up to it. Mark wanted to laugh, though he could only shrug his shoulders. He then looked at the 3 children he saved earlier. Unexpectedly, the 3 approached him without hesitation. Picking the 3 and Morgan, who was still unconscious, they flew to leave the area. With that arrangement, the ones left behind hid inside a utility area on the roof while they wait for Mark to come back. Because of the transition of the abilities the 2 used to fly faster, the people they brought felt a bit dizzy. Still, they held on tightly. They did not leave the city but flew just past the collapsed bridges. Past the main island, the number of infected considerably decreased. They chose a wide empty parking area to land. There, May was left to guard while Mark picked up the other survivors. It took a maximum of 15 minutes. Finally, the rooftop of Bally's casino was empty. Even so, the whole place looked like a festival with the number of infected gathered in the streets. Even a needle would have a hard time falling to the ground. At the last flight Mark did, even his scalp was tingling with the infected that gathered below. Since the majority of the infected were mutated ones, many of them had the appearance that was enough to make everyone puke. Mark did not see these infected earlier, which meant that they could have come from other areas. Unknown to Mark and the survivors of Bally's casino, the situation gave way for the other survivor groups to have the opportunity to leave the city. The infected in the city left in hordes towards the eastern coast, leaving the other parts almost devoid of the infected. If they did not leave the place now, they would never be able to in the future. It became a wide migration of survivors. Inside the whole city, there were about 400 survivors divided into several groups. They were all struggling to survive and many of them already died. There was no way for them to let this opportunity go. Still, the unfortunate thing was that, now that they had the opportunity to escape this hellish city, their true colors came out. Many of the mutators left their groups alone and rushed to escape. Some left unnoticed, using the ones they left behind as bait for the remaining infected. Many of them only bonded as a group because they had to. They could not survive alone in this city. Now that they could leave, there was no need to stick with the weaklings. One of the things that led to this was the hope that only this city was enveloped by the outbreak. Since many witnessed when the military bombed the bridges and they lost communication with anyone outside the city, many of them thought that only this city was affected by the outbreak. They thought that the bridges were bombed to contain the infected in one place. Their unstable minds and emotions made them believe those things. Outside the city, there was the military, the government, the living people. Outside the city, they would be safe. But when first mutators managed to reach the bridge and used the remains of it to cross, their eyes were opened wide by the awful truth. From the forests, evolved animals that were living there rushed out to the survivors. With 4 months that the place was devoid of humans, these hungry beasts saw them as prey. A bloody battle ensued for those that were able. For those who were not, they could only run in fear as they tried to escape the slaughter. Along the way, Mark managed to detect one of those scenes. However, there was no reason to stop. He brought Arnold, who was last to leave, towards the waiting point. As everyone arrived, many of them had tears at the corner of their eyes. They never thought that they would be able to leave the city alive, after all. The current situation was no less than a miracle for them. Now then, Mark spoke. I will give you people 2 options. Hearing Mark speak, everyone listened carefully. First, I can bring those who wanted to our base, in a condition that all of you will follow and live under my rules. Second, those who want can leave now. I won't stop them. I'll give everyone 5 minutes to decide. Murmurs ensued across the group. After all, even though Mark had saved them and brought them out of the city, it was not easy to trust people. Then, Felicia asked a question. What about him? She pointed at Morgan. There is no way that he will be able to choose in that condition. Are we going to choose for him? There, Mark tilted his head. No, whether any of you like it or not, we will take this guy back with us. Everyone froze. But considering the display that Morgan showed earlier, it was possible that Mark wanted him because of that. Are you going to exploit Morgan? Felicia asked with a fierce glare. I'll ask you. Mark sneered. Do you think we need to exploit anyone? It was a proud and confident declaration that sounded too annoying to hear. Nevertheless, even if they wanted to, they could not retort. After all, they saw what Mark and May were capable of. And it was possible that what they saw was not all of what they were capable of. Looking at their reactions, Mark could only smile inside. It was what Mark ensured when he chose these people to save. All of them had strong sentiments towards Morgan. And according to his plan, we can't leave Morgan alone with you. We are sure that we won't win in a fight, so we are following your arrangements. Arnold boldly declared without even 2 minutes of their discussion. It was the scene that Mark was aiming for since the start. As the situation was addressed and the group had given their decision, the only thing left was to wait for Sparrow's portal that would take them back after a day. Gerger, that is why I came here. May interjected at that time and told the situation while showing the map she carried. Mark could only breathe deeply. Of course, things would not be easy. Day 126 to 2:11 p.m. Parking space, Absecon Boulevard, Atlantic City, New Jersey, United States of America. The survivors of Bally's Casino walked behind Mark and May with utmost vigilance. They finally left the main island of Atlantic City. From behind, they could see the silhouette of the collapsed bridge connecting the main island to the mainland of New Jersey, the Absecon Boulevard Bridge. It was the line that every single one of them wanted to cross ever since the apocalypse started. In the end, there were only 13 of them left from their whole group that managed to reach that goal. Many died, sacrifices happened, it was all for the sake of surviving. Now, however, even though they managed to get out of the hellish cityscape, most of them felt empty. Like the others, they thought that getting out of the city would be the end of their suffering. Like in that movie where the whole city was locked down, and the outside was still safe and sound until several years later. Contrary to their thoughts, the goal they wanted to reach was the actual beginning of their journey. And the worst thing, aside from the ragged clothes they were wearing, they were not able to bring anything with them. Not even a single candy to eat or a fork to use as a weapon. Furthermore, it was fortunate that they were traversing the road they were on right now during the day. If it was during night time, they would not know how they died. From that collapsed bridge, the whole road they needed to traverse was grassy plains and small forests. To the next city, they needed to walk around 5 kilometers of this deadly road. Fortunately for them, Mark and May, who saved them, had been leading the way. Since the moment they arrived at the road, they had been attacked for more than a dozen times already. Even though the way was rather desolated in appearance, many abandoned cars were strangely piled up in the middle of the boulevard. The appearance of the vehicles and the number of infected on this side of this Absecon Boulevard bridge only led to one conclusion. Many thought that the island of Atlantic City was a safe place being by the coast and was isolated from the mainland with bridges. That thought only led to them being trapped in this road and were left to die with nowhere to run. As they said, the grass is greener on the other side. Unfortunately, not only that the road to the other side was cut off, but it was more dangerous in a deadly way. Nevertheless, the only issue was the number of infected. In fact, even these survivors that managed to live inside Atlantic City all this time felt that the infected here was weaker than those that they encountered before. That was how their lives were honed by a more dangerous environment. The survivors were wary of the surroundings due to the danger. Mark, on the other hand, was watching out for the infected because of a completely different reason. Right now, Mark was pulling a black metal cart behind him. On the cart, the restrained, queen-type, lay while struggling. However, the cart was rather small and unbalanced. This cart was made using the blood of the infected they were encountering on the way. However, since the ratio of conversion was still on the low side, it was hard to complete a whole cart with just a few dozen infected. Especially when the infected had lesser blood flowing through their veins because of starvation. Of course, due to mutagen, the biter types would not die of starvation that fast. However, they would still have complications like this. Furthermore, if they actually died, they would turn into eater types, which did not seem to require blood at all in their bodies to continue moving. By the way, sir, where are we going? Where is your base located? Arnold, who was carrying Morgan on his back, asked. Although they agreed to follow Mark as they had no other choice at all where they would survive, Mark never told them where his base was located. Oh, I forgot to tell you guys, Mark replied while looking above his shoulder. Our base at Quezon Province in the Philippines. Huh? Everyone froze, except May, froze. Can you please repeat that again? Arnold could not register the answer in his brain and decided to ask once more. Quezon Province, Philippines. Mark replied with a bit of a smug look. He rather liked the shocked appearance of the people behind them right now. Philippines? Not Philadelphia, right? Ernst asked in a very awkward manner. Finally, everyone, aside from the 3 children, could not believe what they had just heard. To think of it, now that both Mark and May's faces were revealed to them, they did not look like locals at all. Although there was that. But it was also possible that they were tourists like some of them. Still, the Philippines? Philadelphia was already far enough from this place on foot. Just how were they going to the Philippines? Furthermore, they felt quite unsettled, hearing that they would be going to a country on the opposite side of the globe. All of them here had never stepped into an Asian country, after all. With those things in mind, their eyes fell on May. They remembered that May suddenly appeared in front of them out of thin air. What you guys are thinking is wrong. We have a different way of going home. It's just we needed to go to Reading, Pennsylvania first since we can only return from there. Everyone felt mystified. However, considering the display of the 2 earlier, it was not wrong to believe that Mark and May could do many things that were far from their imagination. GRROOWWLLL. Every one of the survivors flinched and got ready to fight. Well, everyone aside from the little girl who was now red-faced. There was no danger around, and they found out where the growling sound came from soon after. The survivors could not help but laugh. It was a good atmosphere changer. Nevertheless, it made everyone realize that all of them were hungry. Furthermore, since their supplies were dwindling, they already ate a little this morning. Now, they did not have anything to eat at all. The eyes of the survivors fell on the abandoned cars on the road. Maybe, just maybe, there was still food left in some of the vehicles. Don't bother looking. Here? Mark suddenly spoke to them as a black hole opened in front of his hand. His hand entered the hole. And when he pulled it out, a medium-sized plastic bag filled with things was magically on his grasp. He threw the bag towards Ernst, and he clumsily caught it in surprise. Opening the bag, they were surprised to see that it was filled with luxury chocolates. Just make do with those. We'll eat later if we find a suitable place. Everyone could not say anything and could only stare at Mark in amazement. This strange couple was filled with mystery. That was the only thing they could think of. Everyone continued walking while eating the chocolates they received from Mark. To say, these chocolates never tasted as good as before. Not only these chocolates were free, but they did not have to risk their lives to get a single bite of it. They remembered one time that just to get a small box of candies from a stall at the rooftop of the opposite building, they lost one of their people. They could only wish that they would not go over that experience once more. Uncle, are you and big sister wizards? Everyone was too focused on watching out for danger and what they were eating that they did not notice the 8-year-old boy that already pulled the hem of Mark's tattered shirt. Mark and May were their only lifeline here. Thus, they were trying hard not to offend them in any way. They even refrained in asking more private information and just followed behind attentively. Furthermore, Mark did not look like someone approachable at all. That caused them to be surprised when the boy did this. What made them afraid, however, was that Mark and May were obviously lovers. Yet, the boy called Mark as uncle and May as big sister. It would not be surprising if it was received as an insult. To the boy's question, Mark and May looked at each other. With a shrug, Mark turned to the boy, who was not even afraid of approaching him. Not to mention that he was pulling a cart carrying a very dangerous infected. Then, Mark replied, "Honestly, I'm not a wizard, I'm a demon." He did not bother about being called uncle, he was used to it. Demon? But demons are bad guys. The boy asked once more. The others in their group already wanted to pull the boy away. However, Mark shook his head to them mischievously. "You don't believe me?" Mark snickered. "Look." With those words, Mark's eyes glowed red, his fangs grew, and two horns sprouted on his forehead. Along with the pressure that naturally comes when he transformed, everyone felt afraid. They could even see the evolved animals in the grassland fleeing from fear. But then, cool. The boy was staring at Mark with his eyes shining brightly as if an avid fan saw his idol. This made Mark undo his transformation while looking at the boy in confusion. Although he toned down the pressure so that it would not injure the boy who was standing next to him, it should still feel heavy and frightening. Still, the boy stood in front of him like it was nothing. Now to think of it, it was also this boy that approached him and asked if they were already dead, and he was there to pick them up. It was even though the bloody scene was enough to make the two other children freeze in fear. Mark turned back to May. It seemed like she was thinking the same. This boy was odd. Then, Mark made another test. His eyes glowed red as he targeted the boy with his emotion induction. But the boy stood there unmoving, blinking innocently, as he stared directly at Mark's glowing eyes in amazement. Sure enough, even his emotion induction was not working on the boy. Mark's eyes returned to normal, and he ruffled the boy's head. "What is your name?" "Kylam. My friends call me Kale." The boy energetically answered. "All right, I'll call you Kale then. Go back to those two. They look worried. Don't run around and keep following behind us closely," Mark said as he gently pushed Kylam towards the two other children. "Yes." Kylam nodded with a smile as he returned to the grasp of the two. "Looks like we unexpectedly found another treasure." "Yeah." Mark and May exchanged as they glanced at the boy that was being scolded by the two other children. To not feel the pressure from Mark and being unaffected by his mental attack, the boy was absolutely strange. Still, Mark could not fathom what was strange about the boy. Was he incredibly insensitive to the flow of magical energy? Or maybe, he had the ability to negate it? Mark and May had those questions in mind as they walked all the way. After more than an hour of long, abandoned road, the clear visage of the next city was in sight. From here, the road would be more dangerous. Of course, Mark did not plan to go on foot. The next thing they needed to do was to find a good place to hide while he searched for a vehicle they could use. As they exited the boundaries of Atlantic City, Mark looked behind. The drones stealthily following them also stopped. Mark glared at the drone and shook his head slightly. It seemed that the soldiers got his message and finally retreated. Now, before sunset, they had to find a good place to stay. *** Volume 8 End Day 126 to 7:32 p.m. Royal Lodge, East Absecon Boulevard, Absecon, New Jersey, United States of America. Along the empty boulevard, a small family-owned lodging with a great view of the Absecon Bay. The rooms looked dated, and it was low in terms of quality compared to the other lodgings dozens of meters away along the same road. The security of the place was questionable, and the facilities were not functioning for the most part. Furthermore, the apocalypse turned it into a dilapidated building filled with a bloody mess. Nevertheless, if one was looking for a quick lodging in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, it was one of the best options. After all, even though the security was not up to standards, it was easier to clear as it had a lesser number of infected wandering around or trapped inside its walls. Now, A group of 15 people was currently spending their time in this place for the night. Of course, it was no other than Mark and May, together with the survivors of Bally's casino. With Mark and May around, clearing the infected and the problem with security got addressed without question. Cleaning the rooms that they needed to use fell in the hands of the survivors. They had no questions against it either. What mattered was safety. They had no issues for doing menial labor after it was secured. Nevertheless, they never thought that it would be quite harder than they imagined. Rotting corpses left inside the rooms almost made their stomachs turn upside down. Although these survivors had seen the infected daily since the outbreak, a dead, decomposing corpse was still different. Not to mention that they had to clean these disgusting, rotting piles of flesh that already stuck to the floor and walls. Fortunately, they only had to clean 3 rooms on the second floor of the lodge. They picked the area above the office on the first floor that was easier to clean than the others. While the survivors cleaned the rooms, May stood guard. Mark, on the other hand, left for an hour. When he came back, they were yet to finish cleaning as the rooms were too filthy. Then, it was when they heard Mark speak. "Hurry up cleaning so we can cook a meal." That was when they noticed the 2 strange-looking rabbits that Mark had on his hand. They looked like cottontail rabbits, but they had long, sharp fangs instead of incisors. But seeing the rabbits, what came into the minds of the survivors was not doubt if these animals were edible or not. What was in their minds was that they never tasted fresh meat ever since the outbreak started. It had been 4 months already. Some of them could not help but swallow their saliva because of that thought. Because of that, their cleaning efficiency suddenly spiked up. Even the children were affected by their eagerness and started helping in doing smaller work. Seeing that, Mark and May could only shrug as they prepared the rabbits together. When the night came, they were already eating a well-cooked meal after a long time. It was just a plain salted stew. The seasoning they found in the kitchen of the lodge was not even enough. From the looks of it, other people might have searched the place already long before. Nevertheless, the taste of meat almost made them tear up. Mark and May left the group to their own and ate in another room. After all, this arrangement was better for the survivors as they only met Mark and May today. The survivors ate energetically. It was until the survivors noticed one of them. The other female mutator, Sandy Miller, was only staring at the bowl of food in front of her. She was a woman in her mid-30s. She was not beautiful, and she did not have an attractive body, either. However, what made her stand out from the group was that she was compassionate to everyone. "Sandy, what's wrong? Did you not like your food?" Arnold asked as he was the first to notice her. Sandy snapped out of her daze because of the question. It was when she noticed that everyone was staring at her, waiting for her answer. "No, I'm fine. The food is delicious. I just had things in my mind." "Is it about your family?" Felicia asked as she stood up from her seat next to the unconscious Morgan and sat beside Sandy. Most of the survivors that were stranded in Bally's casino were either tourists or employees around the area. Sandy was one of the former, and she was with her family. Her husband and 2 children. Unfortunately, their family was among the first casualties of the outbreak in Atlantic City, and it was the very same incident that turned her into a mutator. Sandy shook her head to that question. "I'm still sad about my family, but that's not it. It's just, there is still a lot of us this morning, hungry and worrying for the future. Now, we have food, but there's only 13 of us left." Hearing that, everyone could not help but feel down. It was the worst atmosphere breaker. However, no one wanted to rebuke Sandy. She was the mother figure of the group, so they understand her sentiment. What she said was also correct. When they escaped the casino, Sandy even asked Mark if they were the only ones left, which he nodded as a response. It just meant that either everyone else was already dead or already turned. They were the only ones left of their group. All of them were too shocked by the events that happened earlier. It caused them to not think much of anything else aside from their survival. Now that things had calmed down, the emotions for those events started to haunt them. "It is better if we don't think about it too much," Arnold said, which made everyone look at him. After all, What he said was quite cold-hearted and was not like him at all. Nevertheless, when they saw his expression by the gloomy fire they had, he was obviously feeling down. Then, Arnold continued. Let's just think that they already escaped the hardships that we are going to experience from here on out. Remember that we are following Sir Mark and Miss May, but we are never sure what we will find while following them. That's true. Felicia also spoke. Living in this world now was no different from being thrown in the middle of the Amazon forest, hard and deadly. In the least, none of them will struggle like us. They are dead, we are alive. That's all that matters. Ernst also spoke. What he said, however, earned him everyone's unfriendly glare. Huh? Did I say something wrong? Ernst noticed their glares and was confused. He was just stating facts, after all. We are trying to cheer everyone up, you idiot with no social skills. Ouch. Arnold knocked on the head of Ernst. It was a friendly knock, but it sounded quite heavy. Ernst could only hold his head in pain while staring at Arnold with an expression that did not know what he did wrong. Seeing that, everyone laughed. Hey! Shush! Felicia immediately hushed everyone, causing them to cover and zip their mouths. That was right, it was not the time for laughing out loud. What if they attracted anything dangerous outside? They might also disturb Mark and May next door. Nevertheless, the atmosphere was much better. Even Sandy was smiling a bit. Many have died, and they were the only ones left in their group. Yet, fighting together with everyone for survival and managing to succeed, even with Mark's help, brought everyone closer. Arnold watched everyone as they started to continue eating. He was smiling, but behind that smile, there was a tint of sadness and disappointment. Inside this room, only Arnold had the guts to ask Mark a question. It was why Mark saved them. And the answer was unexpected. It was because they did not run away and tried to fight the infected despite the disadvantage, whether it was to protect or let the others run away. Who would have thought that a moment of valiance would let them survive that deadly situation? But then, at the same time, the answer told him an awful truth. Among their whole group of survivors consisting of about 150 people, only 13 of them stood their ground in front of the infected. Whether it was to protect or just plain bravery, only that number passed Mark's test. As for everyone else, they abandoned everything for their own safety. Even sacrificing Arnold and the others who stood behind, taking their words for granted. And to think that even 3 children passed. It meant that these 3 children worth more than all those people left to die. It was an awful truth that Arnold would not tell everyone here. They, who managed to survive, valued everyone from the group. They would be emotionally distressed if they learned of this. Even if it was known to them, in the least, it would not come from his mouth. Asterisk asterisk. What a rowdy bunch, Mark said as he heard the laughter. Of course, he did not mean it negatively. A good mood and mentality was one thing that survivors needed to maintain in front of adversities. It would keep them going even at times that there was seemingly no hope. Mark and May sat together as they ate their bowl of stew. Compared to what they ate at the base, and in the spirit dimension, it was awful. Of course, it tasted good enough to be eaten because of the natural flavor of evolved meat. Gurgur, here, May said while eating as she took out some clothes from her space ring. Mark was quite surprised by this, but also thankful. He never had time to properly change away from his ragged clothes or even find some. Still, for May to bring some, she was really prepared. It's because I saw Gurgur's clothes already tattered before entering the portal, so I brought this. Also, when Gurgur is not responding when I'm contacting, I know that Gurgur is concentrated at something again. Gurgur even forgets to take baths when working at the workshop, so I thought that Gurgur will even forget to look for clothes. May's reasoning made Mark speechless. However, there was no retort that he could think of as everything was true. All right, you got me. Mark caressed May's head. I'll change after we eat. Thump. Thump. Grr. A noise disturbed the time of the two. It was no other than the queen type, who was still struggling from her restraints. Looking at the queen type, Mark thought of things to make her stop making noises. Maybe I should affix her to the wall. Mark murmured. Gurgur, that will only make her noisier, I think, May said while glaring at the queen type. While thinking, Mark's eyes fell on the stew he was eating. Suddenly, he conjured a small blood whip that immediately turned into a metal skewer. He pierced a mouthful chunk of rabbit meat on his bowl and stood up, walking towards the queen type. Mark removed the part of the restraints that disabled the queen type from opening her mouth. The first thing that the queen type tried to do was to screech. However, before she was able to do so, a chunk of rabbit meat entered her mouth. Wide-eyed, she started chewing. Swallowing the meat, she stared at the skewer that already had another chunk of meat. What this? Mark asked as he waved the skewer side to side. Like a hungry cat, the queen type followed it with her eyes. Stop making noise and I'll give you more, understand? The queen type was not responding. However, she was intently staring at the skewer on Mark's hand. No noise. Understand? Mark said more firmly. He knew that even though not everything, just like the king type, the queen type, should be able to understand some words. Finally, the queen type nodded weakly. There, Mark gave her a few more chunks of meat before she was satisfied and went quiet. When Mark went back to his seat, he noticed that May had not touched her food since he stood up. Why are you not eating? Mark asked, and the reply was, Ah. May closed her eyes, blushing as she opened her mouth. Mark could only sigh and did what she wanted. There was nothing hard in feeding a jealous girl, after all. Day 127 to 6:32 a.m. Royal Lodge, Absecon BLV. Absecon, New Jersey, United States of America. Early in the morning, as soon the sun rose from the east, everyone got ready to leave. Everyone knew that they still had a very long way to go to get to safety. The goal of this journey was to get to the pagoda in Reading, Pennsylvania. It was the fifth largest city in Pennsylvania, located in the southeastern part of the state. And from their current location, the shore of Absecon Bay, the shortest route they could take was still more than 185 kilometers. Using a family car and going through the Atlantic City Expressway, it would take around 2.5 hours to travel that distance back before the outbreak. Now, however, this travel might take several days, if nothing goes wrong in the middle journey. And unfortunately, the chances of something going wrong was rather high. No matter what road they took, it would lead them to pass through several infested cities before reaching their destination. We will be going through the shortest route, so everyone should focus, Mark said to the survivors with a serene expression. Everyone nodded. Although if the infected inside Atlantic City looked fiercer than those outside, they could not let their guards down. Even though they were currently under Mark and May's protection, they should not be too complacent. They did not survive these 4 months trapped in the middle of Atlantic City without learning anything. And thus, everyone left the dilapidated lodge, facing the empty road. Their load was quite light, with only 4 backpacks carried by the survivors. These backpacks had some items they managed to find in the lodge. It contained a few clothes, the little amount of seasoning they got from the kitchen, and some sanitary items that were yet to expire. Being a lodge, it still had the things of the people staying there when the outbreak started. Most of it smelled gross, though, after the smell of rotting corpses seeped into the items. That was why there were very few things that they could take with them. The cars outside the lodge had some valuables like gadgets and other stuff that most people bring on vacations. The electronics were unusable without electricity, and thus, left behind. A car had a set of tent though, which they gladly took. There were also cars left open, even with keys inside. However, after 4 months of being left without maintenance, the vehicles would not start anymore. The batteries were already dry, and the gas had gone stale. Even if they wanted to hijack a vehicle, none of the cars would start at all. They had no choice but to continue on foot with the items they had taken. On the other hand, Mark could have requested a vehicle from the U.S. military. It would just take a few minutes for him to go to the Great Island military base. However, with that little favor, the U.S. government might use it for something troublesome. He could steal, but it would also bring some trouble. It was hard to be indebted to the government, any government. Comparing walking through cities filled with infected and having a debt to the government, both were equally dangerous. Dealing with the infected was better as they could not scheme, unlike humans. Mark would also prefer adventure than diplomacy. The whole group started walking north, following the East Absecon Boulevard. Luckily, the road was pretty much empty. It was your typical countryside road during a zombie apocalypse. The infected were more concentrated in cities where humans lived before. On the other hand, there were fewer infected in these kinds of places. There was a downside, though. Evolved animals frequented areas like this. A vast grassland surrounded the road, filled with knee-high grass and bushes. Those surroundings made it easier to spot the animals roaming the area. There were also smaller ones hiding in the thickets. However, for some reason, none of them were brave enough to attack Mark's group. The animals could only watch their supposed prey in fear. Mark pulled the cart carrying the queen type and the empress spider, without minding the animals watching them. Like how it was in their base, the animals could feel a grave threat from Mark and dared not to take action. Still, Arnold and the others did not know that and were still wary of the animals. After all, even though they had encountered who knows how many mutated infected, yesterday afternoon was the very first time they had seen an evolved animal. And to them, even the small cat they saw with metal spikes around its neck was very dangerous. These animals made them realize that the world was not what they remembered. Mark and May led the group as they passed by the other lodgings and a large hotel along the road not far from where they started. They took care not to make too much noise as there were quite many infected roaming the vicinity of the hotel. Most of them were regular infected, biters and eaters, though there were some strange-looking mutated ones. Crash! A loud sound of glass breaking sounded. It seemed that an infected from the higher floors saw them passing. That was not a good move though, because the infected was on the 6th floor. It ended up falling unto its death. The sound of flesh falling to the ground echoed from the hotel's front parking. Still, everyone hurried to pass by the hotel as the sound of crashing glass alerted the entire hotel. There would not be much danger for the group even if the infected from the hotel confronted them. Nevertheless, rather than wasting time while fighting the infected, it was better to continue on the road. Avoid unnecessary fighting. That was what Mark planted on his mind this time. Leaving the vicinity of the hotel, they reached an abandoned house. From there, it would be a long patch of empty land until they reached the outskirts of the next city. While walking, Mark could not help but notice May looking around. "What's wrong?" Mark asked. "There's nothing wrong, it's just I never thought that a single road could look pretty like this." May had a strange reply. Nevertheless, Mark could understand what she was saying. If you removed the infected out of the way, the green grass by the roadside and the properly maintained road before the apocalypse, the scene looked beautiful. Now, the plants had overgrown, and some were crawling in the middle of the road. Nevertheless, it added to the beauty. In the least, compared to the ones back in the Philippines, this scene was better. After all, it was more common to see unmaintained roads in the Philippines, especially the older ones. After walking for about 20 minutes, they finally reached the outskirts of Absecon. The first two buildings they saw made Mark feel a bit funny. Disregarding the first one, which was another small motel, the second building was the Home Depot, and a big mall at that. "Gerger." May called out to Mark. "What, you look very interested in that mall." "Ah, I guess so. I always hear about the Home Depot when watching Reddit videos before, but I never been to one." May tilted her head. She could not understand what Mark was talking about. "Don't mind it. Let's go." Mark patted May's head and urged her to continue walking. And as expected, as Mark's group went closer to the city, the number of the infected in the streets was increasing. Leaving the cart to May for a bit, Mark turned into smoke and dispatched the infected along the way. Mark had to do it quickly and efficiently. He had to prevent alerting more infected, and thus, had to kill everything in front. Blood splashed, heads rolled. In every swing of his sword, an infected would fall. Still, they could not grow complacent with this. Everyone had to start running while following behind Mark. It was because the smell of blood could still attract some of the infected, especially the infected animals that had a keen sense of smell. Sure enough, while Mark was dispatching the infected in front, a tiger-sized infected dog jumped out of the windows of the closest building. "Pull this." May handed the cart to Felicia, who could only receive it. Then, May's body flashed and appeared above the charging dog. Because of the flash of light, the dog noticed May above it. Nevertheless, it was already late for the dog to react. May was already pointing her white sword downwards as she fell. Shwirk. Thud. The dog's lifeless body collapsed with May's sword fixing its head to the ground. As she landed, May immediately pulled the sword off the head and waved it to remove the blood. That scene made the males in the group fascinated. "Stop, ogling. All of you might get your heads off your necks," Felicia warned, which snapped the men out of their trance with embarrassed and flustered expressions. "What are all of you doing?" Mark suddenly appeared in front, making them shocked. No one dared to reply, and could only swim their eyes. Mark took the cart from Felicia, and as May returned, they continued on their way. However, they noticed something. Mark and May were running fast while dispatching the infected along the way. It became harder and harder for them to keep up. And when they reached the road where they would take their first left turn, Mark and May ran off the corner first, disappearing from their eyes. When they reached the corner, Mark and May were gone. What they found was a small horde of infected. There were about 30 infected that immediately noticed the group. As some of them were not actually combatants, they had the urge to step back and retreat. However, retreat where? They needed to find Mark and May. Retreating was never an option. Thus, the mutators led the battle, leaving the still unconscious Morgan to the hands of the non-combatants. Arnold's hands and arms became covered in fur. It was his usual transformation. However, this time, everyone noticed something odd. His eyes became beady, and there was a tail that protruded behind him. "Arnold!" Felicia called out. "What?" Arnold responded hurriedly as the infected was already closing in. "Eyes and tail," Felicia said while pointing behind Arnold. Arnold was confused until he saw the moving tail behind him. It looked like a short, rat tail. Well, he became even more confused. However, there was no time to think about things. He brandished his talon-like claws and cut off the neck of the nearest infected. Felicia also displayed her ability. Her nails also turned into claws of a different kind of animal. Looking at her eyes, it was clear that her mutation was a cat. With her agile movements, she immediately appeared in front of the horde, twisting the necks of the infected caught with her hands. On the other hand, Sandy remained with the non-combatants as her body also changed. Her skin turned greenish with strange patterns similar to a turtle's shell. One of the infected, which seemed to be faster than the others, managed to close into the group. Sandy intercepted the infected and swiped her hand with great force. Bam! With one swipe that hit the infected's temple, the infected was thrown away with a smashed head. Lastly, Ernst. There were no noticeable changes in his body or appearance. However, when an infected approached him, he spat his dark-colored saliva. SISSSS. The head of the infected that was smeared by the saliva immediately melted. Ernst's saliva did not seem to be too potent as the melting stopped after a few seconds. However, as the saliva melted its head up to its brain, the infected stopped moving. They fought the horde bravely, not knowing that Mark and May were just sitting by the pavement beside them. Day 127 to 8:36 a.m. Atlantic 651, Absecon, New Jersey, United States of America. Ha! Ha! The 4 mutators panted heavily. Nevertheless, most of the horde was already dispatched by them. Compared to the commotion they had to experience back in Bally's casino, this number of infected was nothing. However, the circumstances now and then were too different. Inside the closed building, The narrow halls, walls, and pieces of furniture could help in hindering the infected. That way, there was a limited number of infected that they had to deal at a time. In this open intersection, however, the attacks could come from every direction, forcing them to move more than they were used to. The most crucial thing was that they had to protect the non-combatants for the most part. Back in Atlantic City, the non-combatants would stay at the safe house and deal with the jobs they could do there. Everyone that would face the infected on almost a daily basis was all mutators and evolvers. This time, they had to fight in an open space while minding the protection of the people behind them. And due to that, they had to expend more effort and stamina to keep them safe. They did not know why Mark and May suddenly disappeared, but if this was another test, they had to give their best. Felicia, on the other hand, knew that it was more of a punishment to them than a test. This started after these men around her ogled on someone else's partner. As if she would not see that. After all, Felicia was someone who worked on a casino before. One of their requirements was to have keen eyes and talent for observation for them to spot the literal moneybags. Although what they did was nothing but an appreciation of admiration for the scene they witnessed, it was still inappropriate. Still, what a deadly punishment this was. One slip up and anyone could die. Was there not a safer kind of punishment? Were Mark and May watching? They could not even tell where they were. And thus, they could only fight with their lives on the line, and only because of the shallow nature of men towards beauty. Fortunately, they could manage this much. It was quite tiring, but they were about to finish. Felicia and the others only wished that there would be no reinforcements coming. Unfortunately, their thoughts jinxed it. Garua arr. A loud growl-like roar was heard along with quick, heavy footsteps. Following the sound, they saw what was coming, and the sight of the creature made them flinch. A 2-meter-tall canine was rushing towards them from the direction they were supposed to go to. Furthermore, it was not only big, but it had a lot of strange features. It looked like a wolf dog, as it had the appearance of a wolf still looked different. The wolf dog's fur was green in color, and it had a blood-red petal-like protrusion around its neck like a lion's mane. Its claws were shaped like talons of an eagle, and it had a bald, green, scaly tail similar to a rat's. As if panted while running, they could see its snake-like tongue that was also green in color like a vine and had spikes like a feline's. After seeing it, it was not hard to think of a name. Wolfdog Flower Chimera. No other name could fit this mutated infected beast. The survivors gulped their saliva. They did not know if they would be able to handle this one. There was no option to flee either. Damn. That beast. Arnold said as he readied to fight despite the danger. Just where is Sir Mark? He doesn't expect us to fight that thing, right? Don't worry, we'll deal with that. A voice was suddenly heard a few steps behind the group. It made them flinch as they turned their heads towards that direction. There, they saw Mark and May sitting on the pavement with the cart beside them. Just how? Ernst could only mutter those words in surprise and confusion. They had already seen that if May was to use her ability, there would be a flash of light. On the other hand, there would be a trail of fast-moving smoke from Mark. Both abilities should be visible to them if they were looking, and they had been wary of their surroundings since the start of this battle. Yet, as if they were ghosts, Mark and May suddenly appeared just beside them. Mark then stood up and walked in front while May prepared her weapon. Oh, all of you still have to finish the rest of the horde, all right? Mark said while peeking at them over his shoulder. The group of survivors felt a bit of dismay, but their mood was much better. Click. 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 With several clicking sounds, the white sword in May's hand became a sniper rifle. SHHHHOOM. With a quite loud sound, May fired her gun. The bullet shot with strong momentum, flying towards the mutated infected beast. This white sniper rifle sword was called Shooting Moon Edge. It was named by Mark after the completion before the attack at the mountain base happened. However, he did not let May use it at that time to keep it as an emergency trump card. It was Huo Long Yu's sniper rifle sword engraved with the name, Yua Diaresis Kia Bia Nayua N, meaning moon edge. Mark changed the name a bit after he modified it using the materials he had and some unfinished blueprints. And one of those blueprints was the railgun that was yet to be finished. Of course, turning it into an actual railgun was quite impossible. Nevertheless, an accidental result of modifying the Huo Long Yu's weapon was the bullet having a piercing power of a tank's cannon. In the first place, the weapon was designed not only to turn into a sword and a sniper rifle. It could absorb energy from the user to empower the bullets being fired from it. While modifying it, Mark kept most of the weapon intact while replacing the energy conductors inside with strips of spirit wood he had. And thus, the powerful firepower of the weapon was the result. The end product was both a failure and a success. Mark failed in turning it into the weapon in his mind but still succeeded in making it a powerful weapon. Of course, it was not something that anyone could use. The recoil from firing the weapon was enough to dislocate the arm of an ordinary person. However, Mei was not one of them. She was also a blood demon and was a partial pureblood at that. The bullet Mei fired flew at fast speeds. Unexpectedly, the beast suddenly swayed its body downwards, evading the bullet for the most part. The bullet still hit the wolfdog flower chimera. Well, just the end of the tail of the mutated infected beast. GGRRROORR. Nevertheless, it seemed to be painful as a loud growling roar was heard from the beast. SHH. Another shot was fired by Mei. This time, the beast did not just sway its body to evade but jumped to the side as fast as it could while it charged towards Mark, who was already standing in front. In fact, the beast was paying attention to Mei and wanted to attack her first. However, Mark blocked its path. Comparing sizes, Mark and the beast was not far from their heights. However, the enemy still had a larger body. It seemed to be an intelligent infected. However, it looked like it could not assess the strength of the one it was trying to attack. Reaching a few meters from Mark, the beast pressed its two front paws to the ground and pounced towards Mark. The attack was fast and ferocious. If it was one of the mutators behind Mark received this attack, they would definitely die. Mark's body turned into a puff of black smoke, making the beast miss its attack. However, as it was a mutated infected, it did not think anything about Mark suddenly disappearing and immediately switched targets. But then, it froze as it felt danger from above. Mark appeared above it, waving the slicer to behead the beast. The blades of the slicer waved towards the beast's neck. That was when the petals around its neck closed. Clang! Unexpectedly, it gave out a metallic sound when the blade of the slicer and the petals clashed with each other. Still, the attack was too powerful that the body of the beast staggered after receiving it. That situation gave Mei a chance. Mei fired another shot, aiming for the gap on the flowers at the forehead of the target. SHH. Splat, blood and brain matter splattered everywhere as the bullet bore a fist-sized hole on the beast's forehead. Mark stared at the body by his foot. It was such an unusual kind of mutated infected. In fact, he also wanted to catch it. Unfortunately, Aphelia was not here. Even Mark and Mei restrained it. There was no way for them to travel with this gigantic load. Behind Mark, the battle of the survivors from Bally's casino was also finished. They were panting hard as they were tired from the fight. It was just 2 hours after they left the Royal Lodge, yet, they were already tired. It seemed that the physiques of these people were not suited for long travels, not to mention that they had to fight along the way. Done. Let's go. Of course, Mark had no plan to rest. They could slow down their speed, but they definitely could not stop moving. Hearing him, the survivors felt dismayed. However, none of them wanted to be left behind. Mark took the cart once more and led the group in a speed that was easy for tired people to catch up. Everyone noticed the change in speed, and their dismay vanished. Of course, aside from Felicia, they were still wondering why Mark subjected them to that dangerous battle. And for sure, no one would try to tell them. Leaving the bloody intersection, they continued traveling on the road called Atlantic 651. It was a good route as they were trying to avoid the central areas of the city. In fact, after they turned left from that intersection, the cityscape started to change, even though they had not left the city at all. It was because, for the most part of this road, it was filled with greeneries. Trees were everywhere, in and out of the backyards of the houses by the roadside. Furthermore, as they walked away from the intersection, the more forests they would see along the way. And there, they stopped by a pretty nice place to rest, by the side of the Atlantic City Reservoir. The area near the road was wide open. It was easy to spot danger while they rest. The cold breeze also felt good, though the water seemed to be quite murky. Nevertheless, its green color complemented the forest surrounding the reservoir. Because of the fight and the tension it brought, the survivors felt a bit hungry. They decided to snack on what was left of the chocolates that Mark gave them yesterday. The spot was actually a pretty good place to have an early lunch. Arnold also suggested it. However, Mark was against the idea and could only follow his order despite not knowing why. Mark and May, however, stared at the murky water. Although it was not very noticeable, small bubbles were floating up to the surface. It meant that there was something under the water, waiting for everyone to lower their guards. Furthermore, it was not just one, but there seemed to be a lot. A lot. Mark could not even count the number of presences he was detecting underwater. Whatever these creatures were, it was better not to fight them and waste time. And thus, before the creatures underwater could make a move, they left the area. Then, following the rest of the road without taking any unnecessary turns, they arrived back at the main road, the Atlantic City Expressway. They wanted to follow the road as peacefully as possible. However, it seemed like trouble liked to come to the group every now and then. Day 127 to 12:11 p.m. Atlantic City Expressway, Egg Harbor Township, New Jersey, United States of America. Egg Harbor Township. It was a township in Atlantic County in New Jersey, one of the places where the Atlantic City Expressway directly passed through. Right now, the whole group led by Mark and May were following the expressway. Following this road had pros and cons. One of the pros was that the part of the expressway going through Egg Harbor Township and the next town, the Hamilton Township, the road was pretty much isolated from the populated areas. Although there were some housing and commercial areas connected to the expressway, it was fewer compared to other routes. Because of that, the number of infected reduced considerably. It was despite the large number of abandoned vehicles in the middle of the expressway. One of the cons, however, thick, lush forests surrounded this part of the expressway, leading to more evolved animals to be encountered. For most humans, this fact was deadly enough to avoid this road during the apocalypse. To capable some, however, it was a pretty good hunting spot. While many evolved animals retained their size, most had grown bigger. Thus, hunting these beasts yielded more meat. Furthermore, not only the nutritional value of their meat spiked up, but it also served as a great energy supplement for mutators. Well, there would be people hunting animals in this area. That is if there were still humans living around this place. In the middle of the lanes of the expressway, Mark and the whole group walked. Everywhere they passed by, a trail of blood and dead bodies was left behind. "There are too many animals," Felicia said as she looked behind them. Everyone that would look behind might say the same thing. Many times, enemies attacked their group while peacefully walking along the center of the road. Most of the attackers were animals, though. They had seen a whole lot of animals observing them from the shade of the forest. There were all sorts of appearances and sizes. If not for the fact that these animals were dangerous, it was a very interesting sight for them to see. Especially since these animals looked like they had been taken out of a storybook. For the most part, the animals that did not seem to have hostility towards humans looked like herbivores, like rabbits that were more frequent to be seen. Of course, these rabbits were not docile and to be trifled with. After all, to keep surviving in such a hostile environment, they should have the capability. Most of the animals that stood their way were evolved cats and dogs. Thinking about it, these animals might have been domesticated ones before the outbreak. When the apocalypse started, most of them might have turned infected, while those that survived, evolved, and left the urban areas. It was kind of sad if one was to think about that side. After all, these animals were also victims of the apocalypse. Don't think about it too much. There's nothing we can do about these animals right now. Mark looked at Felicia over his shoulder as he slashed the head of an infected shambling towards them. With a sigh, Felicia looked away from the dead bodies of the animals they left behind. Before the outbreak, she had a pet cat at her apartment. The little guy was her only escape after the long hours of stressful work at the casino. In fact, she wanted to see if her cat was still alive. Of course, it was nothing but a wishful thought. And even if it was able to survive, there was a very large chance that it had already turned feral, like how Mark described those animals attacking them without fear. Even for them, who spend their days of the outbreak around the casino, it was easy to notice that there were two types of evolved animals. The first ones retained most of their natural behavior before the outbreak, while the second type was those that attacked any living thing they encountered. Along the way, they also witnessed some animals being attacked by other animals. As such, Mark briefed them about the feral evolved animals. It was a good thing for them to know, though, that not everything had become ravenous flesh-eating infected. Mark looked at the elevation of the sun and took out his phone to check the time. Luckily, he readied several spare batteries inside his space ring. Although the time on his phone was not set up in the time zone of New Jersey, it was not hard to calculate the time. Sure enough, it was already past noon. We should hurry up and find somewhere quiet to eat lunch. Hearing what Mark said, the ears of the survivors from Bally's casino perked up. It made Mark shrug his shoulders as he felt their emotions when any world related to food was mentioned. Well, it was not like he could not understand them. In 4 months that they had to live with a limited amount of food and was very close to dying because of the lack of supply, it was not surprising that the words, eat, and food, sounded like music to their ears. Because of Mark's suggestion, everyone was invigorated. Thus, their pace hastened as they tried to find a good place to prepare lunch. Unfortunately, in order to find a good spot to rest, they had to make a detour from the expressway. It was fortunate that Mark took pains to download an offline map and installed it on every gadget he had. Although the features were not that usable without the internet, they could have a usable reference. Using the map, they managed to find a good spot, a steakhouse. Not only that there it was easy to clear up as the place was rather small, but they also managed to find more items to season their plain food. Still, as they could still attract the infected while eating, the inside of the steakhouse was not quiet. Thus, they moved to the rooftop and prepared their lunch. This time, they would have some grilled birds. Unknown to them, while they were preparing to eat, they were being watched. ********** Day 127 to 1:01 p.m. Hamilton Commons, Mays Landing, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. Hamilton Commons. It was a decently large mall and commercial compound. There were several buildings and facilities around the wide parking area that surrounded the whole place. And at the main building, was being occupied by survivors. Currently, several men were scrambling around the rooftop of the department store. It was because one of their mutators that had the ability to see about a kilometer away without problems spotted some survivors in their territory. Clink. Clink. What's the ruckus all about? A woman with a mercenary look went up the rooftop to question the lookouts. She was wearing some tight tank top while wearing camouflage pants. On her back, an assault rifle was hanging. 2 pistols were holstered on her waist. The strange thing, however, the woman was pulling a chain that locked the neck of a very tall and muscular man behind her. The man did not seem to mind the chains though, as he followed behind the woman silently. "Boss." Everyone on the rooftop immediately greeted. Unexpectedly, this group of rowdy men was being led by a woman. "I spotted some people. They're currently at the roof of the steakhouse." A man with a handkerchief bandana on his forehead and hawk-like pointed eyes spoke while he used his thumb to point at the steakhouse about 250 meters away. The woman opened his hand towards one of the men and a pair of binoculars was given to her immediately. And there, she immediately spotted the small group of survivors currently cooking at the rooftop. "Boss, "What do you think should we do?" one of the lookouts asked. It was a question that would not come from a decent person. In fact, none of them here were decent people. Hamilton Raiders. That was they call themselves after the outbreak started. They took control of this area early in the outbreak and plundered the escaping survivors in the guise of a toll as they blocked the road to the expressway. Many fell victims to their group and many died by their hands. This time, they found people for the first time for a long while. Of course, their malicious minds would spin immediately. They have a beautiful girl with them, huh? The woman said as she licked her lips while looking through the binoculars. "What do you think should we do, Gregor?" The woman turned to the chained man. That was when she noticed that Gregor was staring in the same direction with quite a fierce glare. The woman was quite surprised by this as this chained man was not the type to do so. Well, when he was chained, in the least. With slow movements of his head, Gregor turned to the woman. "Ignore. Dangerous." Hearing those words, everyone was rather surprised. In fact, the strongest person here was the man in chains, Gregor. No one could control him with the exception of Lady Amelie, their female boss. "If you say so," Lady Amelie said with a shrug. She was quite interested in that beauty among those people. However, since Gregor said to ignore them, there was nothing she could do. After all, most of her accomplishments here were because of Gregor. You all heard him. Ignore that group if they are just passing by. That decision from Lady Amelie made the men here dissatisfied. Everyone here had seen the beauty she among that group in the steakhouse. It would be a lie to say that none of them was interested. After all, they would not get tired of a beauty like that. They could keep her for a very long time, unlike the ones that passed by their hands before. That beauty aside, there was also another good-looking woman among that group. Of course, they would want to play with at least one of the two. After saying her decision, Lady Amelie left, pulling Gregor's chain. "Hawker, what do you think?" one of the lookouts asked the mutator that spotted the group first. "Although I don't understand why Gregor wanted to ignore that group, it's better if we follow that," Hawker said without thinking too much. After observing the group after a few minutes, he also left. Both Gregor and Hawker was right, that group was dangerous. Unfortunately, their other members could not see the bigger picture and were blinded by their desire. ****. Tisk. Cowards. The third among the hierarchy in Hamilton Raiders, Sir Kesser, heard about the findings of the lookouts. He was in charge of the westmost building and was the last to know about the survivors the lookouts had spotted. And among the sub-leaders of this group, Sir Kesser was the most courageous. No, reckless was the most appropriate description to call him. "Is there really a beauty among those people?" Sir Kesser asked the man that reported the situation to him. "Yes, sir. I saw it with my eyes. She's like an angel fallen from heaven." To hear that from the man, Sir Kesser's eyes had a deep tint of lust in it. Sir Kesser was notorious for capturing beautiful women even back when they blocked the roads. Even if the victims already paid the toll they set up, he would still capture any woman he got interested in. Unfortunately, he killed most of them in the most unbelievable way. While playing with them, Sir Kesser would mostly get careless. He would end up killing the woman with his sheer weight. After all, he was a man weighing 600 pounds before the outbreak. When he became a mutator, his weight increased further. But unexpectedly, this weight was not his weakness, but his strength. With the nickname Bulldozer, he was capable of demolishing everything on his path. "Ignore Amelie and Hawker. Prepare to capture those people," Sir Kesser said with a wide grin that made his double cheek jiggle. "Yes, sir." The man that reported the situation eagerly replied. In his mind, those survivors were unfortunate. Day 127 to 1:32 p.m. Outback Steakhouse, Black Horse Pike, Mays Landing, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. At the roof of the steakhouse, Mark and May had some delicious grilled birds for lunch. Not only was the meat fresh, but they managed to find more than enough amount of seasonings to flavor their food. Furthermore, since they were at a steakhouse, there was no lack of cooking utensils and utilities to use. Unfortunately, there was no gravy to pair the grilled meat. They found some leftover gravy mix that they could cook. However, with the limited supply of water, it was better to eat grilled meat alone. That was one of the differences inside and outside Atlantic City. In Atlantic City, there was more than enough food to feed the survivors for years. However, it was deadly to go out and scavenge. The outbreak started in the middle of the city, and there was no time to gather supplies before fleeing. Here, on the other hand, there was a considerably lower number of infected, and the roads were also safer. Nevertheless, it was also because of that reason. The supply of ready-to-eat food and drinkable water in the area was scarce. When the outbreak struck, the people managed to prepare to some extent and bring away anything they could use and carry. As for the things left behind, the people that managed to survive the outbreak must have taken those already. Everyone ate a delicious lunch. Nevertheless, none of Mark's group was able to eat calmly. Arnold and the others seemed unaware, but they were looking around impulsively. And for May, it was worse. She was feeling cold for some reason. Mark could tell what this was, however. May would only react like this if she subconsciously noticed that someone was watching her with malicious and lustful intent. Mark was also feeling the same, and he was aware that they were under watch. However, he could not detect anything. It seemed like whoever the person or people watching them was outside the range of his detection. Feeling discomfort, Mark looked around. They were on the roof of a 2-floor building. It meant that if the person watching them was not anywhere with lower elevation, if it was the case, they would not feel this much discomfort. The feeling was strong enough to tell that they were being openly watched. Meaning, the elevation of the source of unwanted attention was higher than them. Mark stealthily looked around. His eyes fell on the mall at the northwest, about 250 meters away. "Mayor, sit here." Mark told May to sit next to him, in the direction opposite of the mall. Sure enough, May's reaction had gotten better. It seemed May also noticed, and she could not help but look at Mark. "Just don't mind it and eat," Mark said as he patted May's head. Because of his hand, May felt even better. Unknowingly, she started to rub her head to his hand even more. The group from Bally's casino, except for the 3 innocent children, could only cast their gazes away. They could not help but get drawn by the affection that the two were showing to each other. However, they did not want to be punished once more. They did not have much to do on the way here, and thus, they could only think of the reason why Mark let them fight a horde back at the intersection. The men were rather dense, and thus, Felicia told the blockheads the reason. Realizing their fault, they decided to reflect on their actions. After all, they still wanted to live. Despite this situation at the rooftop, it made them more relaxed. In the least, the survivors could see that Mark knew what was happening. Furthermore, even though he did it stealthily, Mark was close enough to them to see that he was glancing at the mall. "Don't stare too much. Don't let them know that we know where they are." Mark suddenly spoke to the rest as they also started looking at the mall. They immediately retracted their gazes. Still, Mark confirmed that there might be people there watching them. "Just finish eating quickly, so we can leave." Because of Mark, they all finished food quicker than they expected. After all, it was uncomfortable to eat if you knew that you were being watched by someone. Soon, they left the rooftop to continue the journey after resting their stomachs a little. They also brought more things with them, like the grill they used. Leaving the steakhouse, they passed through the main road alongside the commercial compound. Mark walked, covering May from the mall. It was to hide May from the eyes of the strangers, and it would also allow her to check the mall with less chance of getting noticed. Sure enough, even though they tried hard to not let themselves be seen, May spotted them easily. After all, not only her eyes could see clearly from afar, she could also slow it down to get a better picture. "Sir Mark, are they looking at Miss May? You've been covering her since earlier?" Felicia asked. To her question, Mark nodded. "Flowers attract bees, but most of the time, it's flies," Mark said with a shrug. It was not hard to understand what he meant. May, the flower, was attracting the flies at the mall. Beauty was a good asset. However, without enough protection and strength, it would bring more trouble than necessary. Especially in the outbreak, the laws had been broken, and malicious intent ran rampant. Beautiful and alluring women were the first ones to fail because of this. I'm surprised that Sir Mark is not punishing those flies now, since we just stared a bit, and we had to fight a horde. Ernst complained, making the other men agree. Felicia and the other women looked at them with a nasty glare. I don't have time to deal with them now. It's already past noon. We need to walk as far as we can and find a place to stay for the night. Mark spoke nonchalantly. Nevertheless, the group could feel the coldness within those words. He said that he had no time to deal with them now. Although it looked like a regular statement, for those with keen understanding, it had an underlying meaning. It seems later, he would have time to deal with them. Nevertheless, Mark really wanted to swat these flies now. However, it would be hard to protect Arnold's group if there were some mishaps to happen. Mark was strong. He grew stronger since the apocalypse started. It happened to him, it could also happen to others. It was better not to take chances. Taking a few turns at the road and passing by some familiar spots that Mark only heard and saw on the internet like Chuck E. Cheese and Target when watching videos about entitled people, they returned back to the track stepping at the Atlantic City Expressway once more. Since time was the essence, they walked as fast as they could without turning it into running. Although everyone needed to hurry as much as possible, they still had to conserve their stamina in case of emergencies. The road was long and desolate. Along the road surrounded by trees, the only things they could see were abandoned cars, evolved animals, and mutated infected. There was even one time that they saw a mutated infected and an evolved animal fighting. It was a giant raccoon, about 2 meters in height, with spiky metal-like fur fighting against a disfigured infected with blade-like teeth and claws. Unfortunately for the two, they were blocking the road as they trashed everything on their path. Since Mark and the others had no time to wait for the two to finish, and both were hostile to humans, they were dispatched by Mark in one go. Finding their next lodging was proven difficult in this part of the Atlantic City Expressway. There were almost no buildings by the roadside, and if there was one, it was not secure enough to spend the night in. After walking for more than 3 hours, they reached a compound separating the 2 lanes of Atlantic City Expressway. It looked like a pit stop for the travelers of the road as it had a gas station and a building with several restaurants. There were even a police station and some local government offices. And among these buildings, the only suitable and secure was the police station. However, a police station could make people not related to the police or military a bit stuffy. Thus, Mark checked his map. There were no other choices. On the map, the next area where they could possibly find a secure lodging was another 2 to 3 hour walk away. If they continued on the road, the sun would have set already before they reached that area. Not to mention that they would not know what they would encounter along the expressway to hinder their path. Thus, they could only make do of the police station. They could also check out the restaurants and the gas station convenience store to look for anything they could use. After dispatching the infected wandering outside, they entered through the broken glass door. Upon stepping inside, everyone frowned. The whole place was trashed. It was a police station, what could they expect? The stains of blood covered the many parts of the floor and the walls. Dismembered bones could be seen scattered here and there. Most of the chairs and tables were overturned and seemed to be used as barricades. Bullet casings were also everywhere, and holes on the walls indicated the bullets that hit it. The worst part, there was the stuffy, damp, and unpleasant smell that was lingering inside. Nevertheless, they could only shrug their shoulders as they picked a place to clean. Of course, none of them would ever pick the jail cells to sleep in. Although it needed more work and cleaning, they preferred the office areas. While the survivors cleaned and May took guard, Mark and Arnold went to search the other buildings. And there was almost nothing, aside from the wandering infected. At the convenience store, Mark located the storage. It was locked. The lock was no problem, and he broke it easily. However, it seemed to be barricaded inside. Without wasting time, Mark slashed the hinges of the door, removing it. Cough. Cough. Mark could not help but have a coughing fit. Not because of dust, but because of the lingering smell of rotting flesh that entered his nose the moment he removed the door. "Sir, are you okay?" Arnold asked. Clearing his throat, Mark signaled with his palm that he was all right. There, he kicked the barricade that blocked the door, causing a loud clatter of falling items. Ignoring the smell, Arnold's eyes shone. It was a treasure trove. The untouched boxes of food, drinks, and other necessities lay tidily in racks inside the storage. Seeing all those, Arnold rushed inside to see if he was not mistaken. As he turned at the corner of the door, however, he almost jumped in fright. Mark entered and saw the reason immediately. A decomposing corpse sat by the wall between two shelves. Looking at the splatter of blood on the wall behind the head of the corpse, he must have been shot on his head. No, he was definitely shot, but not by anyone else. Lying by the corpse's right hand, there was a pistol covered in grime. "It's a suicide," Mark murmured. Even though he had lots of supplies with him, the person still gave up. That was just how other people were. They always wanted an easy escape from hardships. Mark and Arnold came back to the police station with the good news. Seeing the boxes Arnold was carrying, everyone rejoiced. Despite that joy, however, Mark went out, looking at the sky. It was getting cloudy, and the wind was getting colder. "Gerger, is something wrong?" May asked as she followed behind him. "Nothing. It just looks like I will have the first snow of my life tonight, and yet, I have to turn it red." With those words, Mark had a sharp look in his eyes. After all, since they left the steakhouse, they had already been followed by that malicious bunch. Or else, they might have traveled even faster on the road. Day 127 to 6:12 p.m. Hamilton Commons Shopping Mall, Hamilton Commons, Mays Landing, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. At the west side area of the shopping mall, the laughter of Sir Kessler alongside the cries of a woman echoed loudly. While the laughter was filled with lust and malicious intent, the weeping yells were filled with pain, begging, and despair. Anyone with the right mind would not be able to bear hearing this kind of cries. Brave ones would not be able to disregard it and try to help, while the cowardly would immediately leave despite their conscience. Unfortunately, there was no one like that in this place. Everyone here was inherently malicious. Although there were also women among the raiders, they did not feel any sympathy towards their victims, even if it was the same gender. In fact, some of them even enjoyed watching their victims as they suffer. They were definitely twisted people. Knock. Knock. A knock was heard, stopping the laughter. "Who is it?" Sir Kessler asked with an annoyed voice. "Sir, it's me." The person outside the room spoke. Knowing whose voice it was, the annoyance was washed away. "Come in." The door opened, and a man with a seemingly thin presence came in. If not for the fact that he called out, he might even be able to enter the room without getting noticed. Furthermore, his steps did not make any sound, as if it was natural. This person was called Hyena in the Hamilton Raiders. He was the second of the best scouts in this group. As he entered, the first thing he saw was a fat pig sitting naked on his bed with a teenaged girl, crying while trying to shrink her bruised body as far as she could from the fat pig. Hyena did not care much about this scene, as he was already used to it, being this fat pig's right-hand man. And by the looks of it, this girl would not last and die in a few days at most. Seriously, this fat pig better take care of his toys. It's not easy to find one nowadays. That was what Hyena thought of before turning his head towards Sir Kessler, who was waiting for his report. The people from earlier had settled down for the night, Hyena reported. They are currently at that police station in the middle of the expressway. That police station? Yes, that police station. Hearing that, Sir Kessler frowned a bit. That beast roams around that area, so we haven't really touched that place. The fat man murmured. Atlantic City Expressway Station was already out of their territory. There was really no need for a boundary for their activities, as there would be no one to complain or go against them in this place. At that commercial compound, However, they decided not to step there unless necessary. Because there was a very strong beast living in that area. It was not strong enough to kill Sir Kesser or the other mutators alone. However, it was intelligent enough to pick on its targets and prepare ambushes. Confronting that beast might lead to unnecessary casualties. That was why this group of raiders did not dare to fight it. Although I left Wolf there as a lookout, I think it is better to just ignore them, sir. However, for the lusty Sir Kesser, women were more important than danger. No, tell our men to prepare. We'll move out immediately. We just need to avoid confrontation with that beast. Hyena did not show any expression. However, this fat bastard is only thinking of himself. If not for the benefits you were giving me, I won't even stand here. Okay, sir. I'll tell everyone to prepare, Hyena said. Wait, send someone to take this girl back to her cell. Tell that no one can touch her. I'm not done with her yet. Sir Kesser said with a grave tone. It seemed like there was a precedent incident before this. At the central area of the mall, Lady Amelie was eating dinner together with the other closer members of the group. That was when someone came in and whispered a report to her. Receiving the report, Lady Amelie could not help but frown. Is it Kesser again? Hawker, who was sipping the stock from his bowl of boiled meat soup, asked. Hearing that, Lady Amelie nodded. What is that fat pig up to now? Kesser is targeting that group we saw this afternoon. After saying that, Lady Amelie turned to Gregor, who was slowly eating beside her. What do you think, Gregor? That question made Gregor slowly turn his head towards Lady Amelie. Then, he slowly shook his head. Will die. Everyone around saw surprised by the bold declaration. Sir Kesser, after all, had the strongest physique and defense among everyone here. He might even be able to stop tank cannons with his body. However, those here knew that Gregor was never wrong in this kind of assessment. Then, just how strong were those people if the assessment was like this? Vroom. While discussing, they heard the rough sound of vehicle engines. Looks like they're going out already, one of the men said. It was clear that the sounds were coming from the vehicles used by Sir Kesser's faction. However, after about a minute or two, they felt strange. It was because the sound of the vehicles never left the front parking of the mall. They could not help but feel strange. Lady Amelie and the others wanted to go to the rooftop of the mall to see what was happening while keeping a safe distance if there was danger. However, as Lady Amelie was about to stand and pulled Gregor's chains, she froze. With Gregor still staying put, there was no way for her to pull him with her. Gregor, what is wrong? Lady Amelie asked. The others also thought that Gregor was behaving strangely. Although he was already an odd person from the start, he would always follow behind her. This was the first time that Gregor did not want to follow. And to Lady Amelie's question, Gregor looked straight at her for the first time in a very long time. Dangerous. Gregor told everyone in a very deep, unsettlingly serene tone. Then, they suddenly heard a plethora of gunshots echoing in their territory. A few minutes back, Sir Kesser and his men were all ready to go. Equipped with guns, more than what they thought as necessary, they jumped onto their vehicles. There were motorbikes, awfully modified with unsightly decorations. The other vehicles were rather common, but each of them was modified to their unsightly tastes. One even had human skulls hanging at the roof of the vehicle. The most eye-catching, however, was the military jeep at the center of the group. Sir Kesser jumped into the back of a military jeep. It was something they plundered before. The vehicle creaked just by the sheer weight of his body, but in the least, this car was built to withstand heavy load. They started their vehicles to warm up the engines. The temperature was getting cold after all. Still, the mood was very high. Everyone was excited. After all, survivors were very scarce nowadays. For them, the feeling of plundering other people and bringing them misery was exhilarating. If possible, they wanted to do it over and over. With everyone aboard their vehicles, they were about to leave. However, when they moved just a few meters from the initial spot, the lights of their vehicles spotted someone standing in front. Normally, they might have just run over the person, thinking that he was an infected shambling around their base. However, everyone stopped. They could see the eyes of the silhouette glowing red and violet. It was not something that an infected could display. Then, one with keen ears among the men heard a murmur. "I didn't think that they had properly maintained vehicles. I would have attacked earlier if I knew. We wasted time walking for nothing. What are you all stopping? Just run that over." Sir Kesser shouted at his men. "Sir, it's not an infected. I can hear him murmuring something." The man in a motorbike decorated with an animal skull spoke in a loud voice. "So what? To stand in front of us, he's just seeking death. If none of you want to run that bastard over, just shoot." Sir Kesser shouted in anger. He was annoyed at how his men were too slow to adapt to the situation. On the other hand, Hyena was frozen stiff. After all, he was one of the 2 people that went out today to follow that group of survivors. And the person standing in front, he would not mistake it. He is one of them. The man that led that group. "Sir, it's the leader of our targets," Hyena shouted, which caused everyone to be surprised. What was one of their targets doing here? But still, if it was really one of their targets, then, what were they doing? Was it not easier for them if they dispatched this guy now that he was alone? "Ha ha ha. I'll do it," one of the men shouted as he readied his assault rifle. "No, I will," another man shouted. All of them readied their gun. They were having a contest on who would kill that man before them. In fact, anyone who would see Thins would think that it was overkill. A whole group of 50 people, where 25 of them were pointing their guns at a single person. Anyone would think that the man was done for. Bang! Rat-a-tat! Bam! A plethora of gunshots was heard. They did not mind whether they were wasting bullets or making too much noise. It had been a while that they killed someone. They wanted to have the pleasure at this moment. The flashes of their guns blinded them because of the darkness, however, continued firing several times at the man's direction. They expected to see a dead body afterward. Nevertheless, after the first volley of gunshots, to their shock, the man was still standing. Furthermore, he did not even move from his spot. They felt shocked. There was also a tint of fear of the situation that they could not understand. When the man started walking towards them, they fired once more. This time, there were more shots and they fired their weapons for a longer time. Despite the rain of bullets, the silhouette continued to advance. His body would turn hazy like a ghost and he was not seen to deflect the bullets either. It was as if the bullets were passing through his body. In fact, they started to notice their bullets made after hitting the things behind the man in front of them. "Gee, ghost!" one of them shouted, causing more disarray within their hearts and minds. "Bastards! Ghosts don't exist," Sir Kesser shouted as he pulled the pin of a grenade he had in the car. Without hesitation, he threw the grenade towards the man. Boom! The explosion illuminated the front as everyone took cover from it. From the last thing they saw, the man was engulfed by the explosion. Before they could see the aftermath of the explosion, however. "Ghosts exist though?" A questioning voice was heard behind Sir Kesser. Everyone looked behind and saw the very same man standing on the military jeep, behind Sir Kesser. "Don't try to fool us," Sir Kesser shouted as he waved his left arm towards the man behind him. However, he hit nothing. The man already jumped off, avoiding the very fast and strong swing. That made everyone frozen even more. Although it was dark, there was still enough visibility for them to see. That attack from Sir Kesser was as fast as a bullet. None of them were able to see it. If it was aimed at them, their bodies would be able to avoid it even if their reactions were fast enough to do so. And yet, the man avoided it like nothing. "I guess, that's enough probing. You people are worthless," the man said as his body vanished like a ghost. As the first snowflake fell, it was the same time that blood started to spill. Day 127 to 6:29 p.m. Hamilton Commons, Mays Landing, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. From the cloudy sky, Snow started to fall. Mark stared at the fat man in front of him while amidst his jump. Although he said out loud that these people were useless, that was not entirely true. Mark just said those words to mess up with the minds of these people. After all, with the display, he had shown them, if he judged them as worthless, it would shrink their ego and increase the fear in their hearts. Well, it was not entirely wrong, either. Mark was already able to fight with lower deity levels to some extent. Compared to those enemies, the ones in front of him were nowhere close to ants. However, Mark was an empath. Although it was unpleasant to absorb other people's emotions without control, it was still satisfying if he was the one that inflicted the fear they were feeling, especially from his enemies. This kind of satisfaction might probably be one of the reasons why demons love to inflict despair to their unfortunate victims. And due to this fear, most people were likely to lose their senses. Pretty much like the situation right now. Unable to control their fears, the men under the fat man aimed their guns at Mark. They already knew that there would be no effect. However, they still did as their reasoning weakened. Furthermore, they even disregarded what was behind and in front of Mark. Bang! Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a. Another round of gunshots sounded. The accuracy of the shots was way worse than before. Even the fat pig that was currently close to Mark got hit with the bullets to everyone's surprise. Still, Mark's blurry visage remained unscathed. Unexpectedly, it was the same for the fat man. The building behind Mark, however, the headquarters of these raiders, turned into a beehive. It was just a small area, and it was not enough to do considerable damage to the shopping mall. However, with how the people inside were screaming and shouting, some of the bullets might have flown inside the building. Possibly, important things or even people got hit. "You bastard! Watch out where you are shooting!" Sir Kesser shouted in rage. If not for him being a mutator, the bullets from his subordinates might have already turned him into Swiss cheese. Luckily, his regular human form was already impervious to bullets. Still, for the fat pig, their enemy right now was very tricky. However, when Sir Kesser physically attacked earlier, Mark avoided it. The fat pig was violent, lustful, and impulsive. Nevertheless, no one among the raiders would be able to deny that Sir Kesser was a fast thinker despite his appearance. Thus, Mark avoiding that attack gave him a quick idea that he could try. After he shouted, he immediately followed it with a punch with the speed of a bullet towards Mark. The moment that Mark landed on the ground, the punch was already coming towards his face. Mark tilted his head to the right. The swift punch from the fat pig passed over his left shoulder, bringing heavy wind pressure with it. When Mark avoided his second attack, Sir Kesser fully believed his misunderstanding. He thought that bullets might not be able to harm the enemy in front of them, but direct attacks like this could. Tap, tap. As that thought entered his mind, Sir Kesser heard 2 taps in front of him. That was when he realized that the man he attacked grabbed his outstretched arm amidst its devastating punch. The punch had yet to stop. As Sir Kesser felt the hands of the enemy, he immediately tried to pull his arm back. However, before he was able to do so, he felt his body rising from the back of the military jeep. The veins on the arms and feet of Mark glowed brightly in the dark snowy night. Then, using the force from the missed attack of Sir Kesser, along with the strength accumulated from his blood, without holding back, he twisted his body and faced backward with the arm in his grasp. Bending his body down, Mark pulled the right wrist of Sir Kesser. In the next split second, everyone stared in disbelief. The more than 600 pounds, Sir Kesser, was hurled fiercely towards the face of the shopping mall. Bam! Crash! Crumble! The force of the throw and the weight of Sir Kesser's body caused the barricades along with the wall of the shopping mall to crumble. A large, crumbling hole was made on the face of the building, scattering dust in the vicinity. That display of strength caused some of the raiders' knees to weaken. Among these 50 people, aside from Sir Kesser, there were 3 other mutators. There were also 7 evolvers. Like Sir Kesser, they thought that the bullets had no effect. Thus, they all rushed forwards to make direct attacks at the enemy. The first to arrive was the fastest one of them, Hyena. Using his fur-covered hands and sharp claws, he swiped at the enemy. Unfortunately, the attack he made missed miserably. His arm continued on its trajectory, and he tried to attack with his other hand, but he froze. Where were his arms? Bam! Hyena was sent flying, splattering blood along the way. Both his arms were suddenly gone. He was bleeding profusely from the stumps that were left of his arms. The others that attacked were not in good shape either. Any part of their body that they used to attack was dismembered. One of the mutators immediately died with his head was missing. I remember you. They heard Mark speak. He was looking at Hyena that was staring at him in both shock and fear. You're the other one that tailed behind us, right? Hyena's eyes turned wide. His already pale complexion from the loss of blood became even paler. From the start, their targets knew that they were being tailed. No wonder that their leader would appear here. Then, what of Wolf, who stayed to keep an eye on them? Then, as if reading his mind, Mark spoke to Hyena. Are you thinking about the other guy you left behind? There, everyone was already shocked, but still, they could not help but have their hearts beat louder. A black hole appeared in front of their enemy and took out something from it. Don't worry, you will follow this guy, Mark said to Hyena as he held out Wolf's decapitated head that was still dripping with blood. These people were mutators. He could take their abilities. However, since Mark rushed here, he had no time to get this guy's mutator ability yet. Thus, he took the head and put it inside his space ring. Nevertheless, even though it was not his intended use of it, the decapitated head was able to inflict more mental damage to these people. Crash. A loud sound from behind was heard, making Mark look above his shoulder. He was not surprised that the fat pig was still alive since he could detect him. What was unexpected, however, was the fat pig's current appearance. His whole body was covered with a metallic sheen. Despite that, however, unlike other mutators with metallization ability, Sir Kesser's movements were not hindered. Not even in the slightest. In fact, his movements were as smooth as if his body was just covered in metallic paint. Still, that was not the case. Sir Kesser's body definitely turned into something metal-like. Patooey! You bastard! Sir Kesser shouted in rage as he spat the dust that entered his mouth. Without any other words, the fat metallic pig charged towards Mark like a race car. These agile and smooth movements were not something that anyone would expect from a person with that body stature. The problem with most heavily overweight people was that their bones and muscles could not handle their weight. Thus, it felt heavy, and it was slowing them down. However, none of those side effects were present with how Sir Kesser moved. I see, Mark murmured as he calmly dodged the charge of Sir Kesser. Mark looked at Kesser, who ended up crashing his own military jeep, with interest. Sir Kesser's ability did not only metallize his skin or muscles. Even his bones were the same, even in his regular human form. Furthermore, Mark could feel some difference from this fat metallic pig compared to the other mutators, something that felt similar to him, and partly to Arnold. It was the feeling of an enhanced mutator. Sir Kesser was a mutator that already mutated further after turning into one. In that case, this fat metallic pig's ability was a good catch. Shouting and cursing after breaking his own vehicle, Sir Kesser glared at Mark. Just who the F***ck are you? Sir Kesser finally came to his senses. They kicked a steel plate this time. Looking at the mutators and evovers lying on the ground, he started thinking that it was better not to risk anything more. But then, a reply came. Something that even though sounded normal, it was definitely saying that Mark would not let them go. The leader of the group that you scumbags are targeting tonight? No one would be able to deny that. After all, everyone here saw the head of Wolf that was sent to stalk the targets. Then. Sir Kesser stuttered. What he was about to say would inflict a great deal of damage to his ego and reputation. You already killed some of us. We won't bother you, people, anymore. If you want supplies or women, I will give you what I have. Isn't it better to let it go? The remaining raiders looked at Sir Kesser in dismay. However, they could not say anything. It might be pleasurable for them to take the lives of others. However, what they feared the most was their lives being taken away from them. To that proposition, everyone stared widely at Mark, who only let out a smirk filled with ridicule. "Don't bother." Mark's eyes stared at them widely with a murderous look. "I can take all those after I'm done with you pieces of garbage." Mark then turned at the already weakening hyena. "That guy you left to keep an eye on us already confessed. You bastards are targeting my wife. Now, tell me, why should I let any one of you go?" The murderous intention spread throughout the surroundings. It became difficult for everyone to breathe. Many of them fell to their bottoms, causing loud clattering sounds as they accidentally let go of their weapons. As if that was not enough, 2 pairs of bat wings sprouted behind Mark, filling everyone's minds and hearts with deep fear. Unlike the others, Sir Kesser was able to endure the pressure better. Sure enough, he was on a different level compared to his men. "Don't look down on me," Sir Kesser shouted as he charged forwards once more. This time, everyone saw a crystal fly above the right wrist of Mark as he pointed his right index finger towards Sir Kesser. A blinding beam of light suddenly fired, depriving almost everyone of their sight. The hot, bright laser fired towards Sir Kesser's body. Sir Kesser could not help but stop and cover his eyes, but then... "Ah! GGGGAHHHELLPPP." Sir Kesser's clothes were immediately burned, revealing his disgusting metallic body. However, the mirror-like properties of his metallic body caused the beam of light to scatter in many directions. The scattered beams of light burned and tore holes in the bodies of the blinded people in the surroundings. Seeing that, Mark smiled as he changed the angles of his arm, directing the scattered beam of light to the remaining enemies. Soon, only Mark and Sir Kesser stood alive. The only ones with intact heads were the dead mutators. However, the beam of light had not stopped, and Sir Kesser tried to resist it as much as he could. However, even a mirror would heat up after bouncing light constantly, not to mention metal. "GGAAA, ha!" Sir Kesser's wails were heard as a hole was melted through his metallic body. After dying, Sir Kesser's body fell down without making too much mess. His whole body was still in its metallic state. With everyone gone, Mark turned towards the building. It was time to deal with the others, but then, several people went out of the building. The man with chains made Mark frown. Day 127 to 6:30 p.m. Hamilton Commons, Mays Landing, Hamilton Township, New Jersey, United States of America. When they heard the first gunshots, Lady Amelie and the others in the central area of the shopping mall wanted to go out. However, Gregor tried to stop them. Dangerous, that was what Gregor terrifyingly insisted on them. However, Lady Amelie was the boss of Hamilton Raiders, the owner of this place right now. There was no way for her to disregard if something was happening inside her territory. "Gregor, I need to go out," Lady Amelie insisted. "If you don't want to, I'll go alone." Of course, it was not because she did not trust Gregor. It was because she was a raider and the boss here, a fearless leader that led everyone here. To shrink inside here in fear was not her style. Besides, the fact that she was leading a group of ruthless, lawless, and malicious people that she needed to show that she was above them all. She was not afraid to die. It was something to be expected once a person joined the field to enter. Seeing her determination, Gregor looked down a bit, then, he stood up. "I'll come. But... danger, escape." No one could understand what danger Gregor was talking about. Nevertheless, they would be wary. At first, they wanted to climb up the roof to see the situation at a safer distance. However, when Lady Amelie and the others left the room, the building shook, and they heard the collapsing walls. Because of that, climbing the roof became more dangerous than being safe. They thought that the building might collapse while they were up at the rooftop. Some of them might be able to avoid it if that happened. Still, more of them would be buried in the rubble. Nevertheless, that fear would not come true. While they rushed out, the gunshots and sound of fighting outside continued for another minute. Seeing their boss rushing out with the fiercest people of the Raiders, more and more of their members tagged along. However, The moment they stepped out of the building, what greeted them was silence. They could only see a silhouette of a man standing in the middle of charred, disfigured pieces of dead bodies. Everyone was speechless at this sight before them. What happened? Lady Amelie could only say in a lowered voice. Nevertheless, no one could explain what happened. Those that were able to see the first parts of the battle had withdrawn after the men of Sir Kesser fired their guns blindly towards the mall. And thus, none witnessed the events afterward. But then, while they stood by the door in a stupor, the silhouette turned his head towards them with his red glowing eyes. Lady Amelie could not help but flinch. She thought that she was not afraid of death. But those eyes, for some reason, felt like swallowing her alive. That was when Gregor stepped forward, shielding her from those eyes. ****** Mark stared at the man with chains. The latter also stared at him. There was a frown of Mark's face as he stared at the man. Humans might not be able to feel or smell, but that man's body was emanating a dark aura and a nauseating smell. The smell of something not human, yet it was. And in this area, there was only one creature Mark could think of that would have such characteristics. You are. While Mark and Gregor stared at each other, Hawker managed to recognize Mark. You were from that group at the steakhouse before. Hearing that, the rest of the raiders, especially those that watched that group from the rooftop, was unable to control their shock. Mark turned his eyes from Gregor to Hawker. So, how is it staring at my wife with those malicious thoughts you pieces of garbage have? There, everyone here realized the primary reason this man appeared here. The lookouts this afternoon was ogling at his wife, offending them in the process. Those that had no participation in that could not help but look at the people here stationed at the roof. On the other hand, those being stared became pale. At first, I only thought of blinding those people. If you ignored us then, we would not have come to this. However, to think that someone was sent to tail us. So, it's better to kill you all, isn't it? Mark declared boldly, even though he was facing about 100 people now. Hearing those words, everyone got ready to fight. They readied their guns, while the 6 mutators and 15 evolvers took readied their stance. Except for Gregor, however. Gregor, what are you doing? Lady Amelie pulled Gregor's chains. However, the large man would not budge an inch. Amelie. Gregor turned his head towards Lady Amelie and spoke in a grave tone. Escape. Gregor wah. Lady Amelie tried to question Gregor. Before she could finish her words, however, she was pushed by Gregor towards Hawker and the other mutators. Escape. Gregor roared at the group. Everyone stared wide-eyed towards Gregor. It was the first time he behaved like this. At their stupor, Gregor suddenly kicked the ground, jumping in front of them. Bam! A loud sound echoed, and a shockwave was felt by everyone in the surroundings as Gregor blocked the attack as Mark appeared before him. While everyone was distracted, Mark made a surprise attack towards the seemingly most important person of the group, the woman that was being protected by the large man. Unexpectedly, the large man was able to catch movements blocking this charge. This is unexpected, Mark spoke. You can gauge how much danger you are in. Unfortunately, the people around you are too numb to notice. Gregor smashed his left hand towards Mark. The latter jumped back to evade the attack, and the missed attack continued to the ground. Bam! A 1-meter diameter crater was created as the closed fist impacted the ground. Gregor did not chase Mark and turned behind him instead. Go! Finally, Hawker and the others realized what Gregor was implying. There was no way of winning this. They should just escape if they wanted to live. You really think that I will let them go? Mark said with deep conceit. His body was enveloped with black smoke that flew above and spread, creating a tall wall around the compound. Everyone was horrified after seeing that scene. Some of the raiders fell on their feet. The others felt their pants wet as yellowish liquid dripped to the ground. You. Gregor stared at Mark in deep anger. What? Mark tilted his head. You're a demon yourself. I'm sure you knew how fun it is to torment others, right? Not to mention, you should be the man-eating kind, aren't you? Those that were still able to react looked at Gregor in disbelief. Don't restrain yourself. Mark provoked. Go all out. Let me see your true form, or else, you can only watch as I kill everyone here. Gregor turned at Lady Amelie. The latter only nodded. With that nod, Gregor tore the chains on his body. RRRA. His deep roar echoed in the surroundings. In front of everyone, his already large, muscular body started to expand. His 2-meter height grew to 4 meters. His whole body grew covered in fur, and the nails on his hands turned into black claws. Head of a goat, horns of a stag, hoofs of a horse on his feet, tail with a split end, and a pair of large, bat wings. The raiders could not help but step back after seeing this form of Gregor. Most of them were locals, while some came from other surrounding states. There was no way for them to not recognize the appearance that was taken out of the myths. The Jersey Devil. Mark smiled. Tell me, are you a genuine one or a descendant? That has nothing to do with you, Gregor shouted in a gurgling voice. Swoo HSS, with a kick, Gregor soared towards Mark, with his speed faster than a bullet. Almost instantly, he was already sweeping towards Mark, brandishing his sharp claws to slice his neck. Mark bent his body backward, and the attack of Gregor passed over him. Missing his attack, Gregor flapped his wings, turning his body back and kicked the ground to charge towards Mark once more. Another swipe of blade-like claws came towards Mark at bullet speed. However, it was evaded once more without difficulty. Gregor flew around very fast that all everyone could see was a sweeping dark shadow. The audience could only believe their eyes that a 4-meter-tall monster like that could move at that speed. Bam! 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 Craters appeared on the parking lot as Gregor kicked the ground every time he charged towards Mark. He kept repeating the attacks while going around from different angles and speeds. What are you all staring for? Support Gregor! Lady Amelie shouted, forcing everyone to snap from their stupor. They immediately readied their guns. Gregor, on the other hand, was being frustrated that none of his attacks could hit despite the speed he was moving. When he saw Amelie ordering her subordinates, he decided to take a chance. GGGGGRA. Gregor flapped his wings above and released a loud roar towards Mark. As the attack was unexpected, Mark felt his ears ache and his eyes blurred. This attack from Gregor was supposed to inflict unconditional fear into the mind of the target. The mental capacity of the enemy, however, was strange. Still, making him stagger was already enough. It was because. Bang! Rat-a-tat-a-tat-a! Bang! Hundreds of bullets shot towards Mark like torrential rain. Being inflicted by the effects of Gregor's roar, the bullets showered upon his body. The bullets bored holes on his body. The impact made his arms numb. Mark's body was turned into a beehive. His body fell to the ground. The raiders stopped shooting, thinking that they won. Before they could rejoice, however, Mark sat up. As he did, flattened bullets could be seen falling from his head and torso. When they looked at what happened, they saw a layer of black metal covering Mark's face and body. They were stunned. Nevertheless, the raiders could see that Mark's arm and feet were not covered by that metal that came out of nowhere. There were countless holes from his arms and legs. But then, Hawker found something strange. The enemy was hit with bullets, but there was no blood. And as Hawker was the one that could see things clearly, he was the first to be horrified. It was when the holes made by the bullets started to spit the bullets out, and the holes healed like the enemy was never wounded. As Mark stood back up, the metal covering his body slowly retracted, and more bullets fell from his body as his arms and legs healed. Well, that was dangerous, Mark said as he looked at the raiders with a sinister smile. Looks like you people can't wait for your turn at all. Clack. Clack. Seeing that they failed, some raiders let go of their guns in fear. The enemy was immortal. There was no way for them to win this. That realization came too late, however. A ball of miasma was conjured on Mark's hands. With a jerk of his palms, the ball of miasma flew towards the raiders. The ball flew like a rocket, causing the raiders to flee in panic. And like a rocket, the ball exploded after making contact with one of the raiders. Wah. Ah. G. The blood-curdling scream of that raider echoed around as the others watched his body quickly rot in front of them. He was still alive, rolling fiercely on the ground. However, his body started to look like a corpse that was dug after being buried for several weeks. Amidst his screams, that raider died. It was a very disgusting and agonizing death. Even though he was already dead, his body continued to rot, creating a puddle of smelly rotten juice on the ground that started to mix with the falling snow. "That's a warning," Mark said. "Wait your turn if you pieces of trash don't want to die that way." Saying those words, Mark turned to Gregor, that was already protecting Lady Amelie. "Now, shall we continue?" Mark asked as he wanted to see the extent of the strength of the creature the myth was.